What do you know about crew cab trucks? I'll tell you what I know. Tom has way too many of them. So we sold this one to my friend Mitch, and now I get to fix it. Yay. First I have to tow it home. That'll be fun. Now I know what you're thinking. Come and swap. Nope, that ain't it. That's that one. It's this whole other thing. We'll get to that later. Nope, I'm Jamie. This is Dead Dodge Garage, and this is an original 440 3/4 ton crew cab long bed Dodge. That is a lot of truck. It's hard to get it all in frame. Was that trailer always bent? Random story. Right here, like, oh, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, something like that. I was towing home a crew cab Dodge behind a Chevy half-ton for some reason, and it almost fell off a trailer, very much like this one. She's a little heavy. Why do we got so many of these now? Seriously. It's the next day, and I suppose I should take at least a minute to explain what we're doing here. Until recently, this very, very brown crew cab 1977 Dodge D200 belonged to Tom Hergert with Rocket Restorations. For some reason, he collected 3 of these things in his quest to eventually build a come-and-swapped D-Series tin grill truck. And we're finally going to do that because we've got a suitable candidate and a parts donor that has everything we need. While he wanted to do the swap with this crew cab long bed truck and make an awesome trailer dragger, he decided he couldn't do it for one very big reason. And it's right here under the hood. You're looking at the original 440 under the hood of an original 440 crew cab truck. Yeah, more on that later. And that's pretty cool. They're rare, hard to come by, and Tom couldn't bring himself to take it apart, which I do understand. There are some interesting things going on with this truck. We'll get to all that in a minute. I don't know why we have so many 77 and 78 trucks right now. It's kind of ridiculous. We'll be doing an engine swap on this one in the very near future. The brown truck doesn't need anything like that, but yeah, it does need quite a bit. Not Mitchell with the black short bed truck, but Mitchell with this black short bed truck was looking for a spiritual successor after this one turned out to be not so good. You may recall a previous video where I found chunks of bearings in the oil pan of this 318 under the short bed four-wheel drive power wagon here. After that, Mitch put it up for sale, and one day I asked him if he wouldn't mind selling me all the parts I needed to make my ramp truck awesome, which he did, and awesome it is. Now sure, I feel a little bad. That was a cool truck, but, well, it's really rough everywhere but on these panels, so, yeah. Oh, there's a 79 we need to do something with still. So, for some reason, Mitchell decided to buy this 440 powered crew cab truck to use as his daily driver. Unfortunately, it does have a laundry list of things that need to be repaired. For like 6 months while Tom owned this truck, I had planned to spend a day or two doing all of this stuff. Well, I get to do it now. The biggest issues are, well, fuel system related. You have to use this electric pump to get it to pump fuel up to the carburetor. And even when it does pump fuel up to the carburetor, there is zero accelerator pump action. Just nothing. You have to pour gas into that thing to get it to fire up. Also, the electrical system. There have been some interesting modifications, let's just say that. I do like the battery shutoff switch here. That's something. The water pump's making horrible dry water pump noises. Yeah, that's not great. Apparently the truck needs an oil pump. The previous owner says occasionally this pump will go into bypass, and what that means is the bypass valve in there just sticks open and the oil pressure at idle drops to almost nothing. Now, we've never seen this happen since Tom's had the truck. We want to prevent the possibility of that happening, so I'll be putting an oil pump on it. The battery's over there, and it's completely dead, which is weird. That had never happened before. Yeah, the electrical weirdness continues in here. Is that? I guess there are speaker boxes in the back or something. There's an old school Kelsey Hayes brake controller, a Bluetooth stereo screwed under the dash, a random light, random gauges, a random homemade bracket for a random tachometer. There's all kinds of weird stuff. It's got the obligatory grandpa cover on the front seat, which might actually be nice. Oh, no, it's ripped here. The back one's pretty nice, though. Apparently, the previous owner worked at O'Reilly. That's kind of funny. It's got a rear slider window, and it's full of moss. Oh, and I've just been reminded, it's rusted out like all the way under the back window. So that's nice. I've never noticed this in a crew cab. It actually has rear shoulder belt mounts. For some reason, the inner roof structure is dented downward. The roof panel itself isn't bent, but maybe it was at one time. It might go back. Every single crew cab rests here in the inner roof above the doors, and this one obviously is no exception. There might be a rat's nest in there, or maybe it's just a bunch of muck. I believe what happens is the drainage path for water is blocked by the rear section of the crew cab inner roof, so it just sits in there and rots the roof out. You don't normally see this on single cab trucks. The good news is the inner roof panel on a crew cab is exactly the same piece of metal as is used on a single cab truck. The bad news is replacing it is a humongous pain, and I know that because I've been involved with that job before. Other than the inner roof and the back of the cab, this thing's in pretty good shape. It's relatively solid, although there are other little holes in places. Clearly it's had some filler work and some repaint over the years. Tailgate's nice, so that's a point to the good. Tin grills. This truck is an adventurer model, and incredibly, every single piece of trim is here. That is just shocking. I've owned several of these, and these pieces are always missing, destroyed. So that's kind of cool. Also note, it has the fancy toolbox in the passenger side of the bed. I thought these liners were plastic, but maybe it's like fiberglass? I don't know, but thankfully it's not a material that rusts, or it would have done that by now. There's actually a lot of space in there. It's a pretty cool feature. Obviously, it's not a perfect match for the truck, but I really like these copper steelies. That tire needs some air. The date code on these tires says 2017. I don't think it's driven 100 miles since then, so that's kind of nice. They could use a wash. We are going to have to do something about this. These fancy dual side pipes got caught on something and bent almost all the way forward into the tire. I don't know if we'll just cut them off, or maybe we'll hook the tractor to them and yank them backwards. We'll see. The truck is indeed set up to tow. I might like to test that feature at some point. So the broad strokes version is every pump attached to the engine is bad. Every wire around it is questionable. There's all kinds of other stuff that needs to be messed with. And it's going to be an uphill battle to get this thing back on the road after who knows how many years. I'm not doing any of that today, though. All I'm going to do is get it fired up and off of Tom's trailer. So you had to borrow this because this truck is humongous. I don't think it would fit on mine at all, and if it did, well, I might break it in half. Currently, starting this truck requires a jump box, an incantation, a very special dance with a specific series of ridiculous movements, and gas poured right down the carburetor. Also connecting up an electric pump. I don't want to have to come back out here 20 times, so I just poured in a lot. The horn almost does something. Anyway. Yeah. No. There's just absolutely no accelerator pump for some reason. Oh, maybe if you pump it 30 times it does something. It goes without saying that we'll be doing a tune on this thing at some point and probably going through this carburetor. There actually is a small packet of receipts in here, all purchased through an O'Reilly employee account. Yeah, I remember that game. When I worked for O'Reilly, I was fixing like 4 A-bodies at once. Factory 440 air cleaner. Very cool. Oh, the tach works. I thought that was dead yesterday. Car light switch lights up. Do we have windshield wipers? We do. Yeah, so this thing's pretty much daily driver ready, except for all those things I said. Working defrost? Pure luxury. Of course, I'm unloading this by myself, and I am completely blind, so yeah, I'm just gonna go for it. What's the worst that could happen? The left ramp almost fell off the trailer. We're good though. I'm sure you can hear the water pump racket from where you're sitting. It is terrible. I just love these trucks. Always have. 440 noises. Exhaust going the wrong direction. Very nice. Probably just go ahead and put window and door seals on the list. Just normal tin grill things. I aired up the bags on a 3rd gen yesterday. Now that the crew cab's off the trailer, it looks absolutely ridiculous. And there we are, classing up my yard with yet another tin grill. Now I'm off to Olympia to return Tom's trailer so he can go collect more junk. We'll get back to this, I don't know, maybe tomorrow. There's something horribly wrong with this truck because it's currently firewalled with an empty trailer and it won't hit 70. That's bad and weird. Well, it's the next day. Somehow it's still nice. Ugh. Step one is something important I forgot to do yesterday, which is put this totally dead battery on the charger. They don't really like being discharged like this. This one's only 3.5 years old. Maybe it'll survive the experience, maybe not. Well, I got the truck fired up with the battery borrowed from Mitchell's other truck, you know, the dead one. And I'm starting to get things figured out here. For one thing, it'll actually idle smoothly with the idle screws like 20 million turns out, which tells me there's some kind of horrible vacuum leak here. Also, it's a really annoying sucking sound until you do this. I don't know what that's about. Anyway, I don't want to get it too hot. I got to turn this thing around, move it out of the way slightly, and get ready to do the water pump. Definitely sounds happier, but it's not quite right yet. I also gave the timing a bump because that's who I am as a person. Oh yeah. You know, sometimes I impress even myself. This is beautiful. I can only barely get all of that in one shot. Anyway, I like it. You know, it's so weird richening the mixture like that and just playing with the timing by ear. It actually starts and runs all nice now. It got dark. Other things happened. I think all the parts for this are at the store of parts, but it's a little late now, so we'll get back to this tomorrow. Hopefully it's still not raining. Yeah, it's the whole family. It's the next day and I'm back on the crew cab here. I just learned that if you lean on this heater hose at all, coolant just pours out and goes everywhere. It's a horrible mess, actually. So there's that, but somehow this water pump doesn't leak. Figure that one out. Anyway, I'm gonna get that off, swap that out first, get all the cooling system stuff done, and then we'll move on to everything else. Big block water pumps are surprisingly easy to replace. Not that small block ones are super hard, but there are brackets and things in the way. On these, you loosen the belts, you pull the cooling fan, the shroud, and the water pump pulley. And then after draining the coolant, which I'm still in the middle of, you remove 4 bolts and smack the pump with something. The only easier water pump job I'm familiar with is that of the 6PT Cummins engine, particularly in first and even second gen Ram trucks. Later ones made it a whole lot harder to get to, but in these, it's the belt, 2 bolts, and of course the coolant that's gonna go everywhere when you pull it. Smash it with a hammer! Or whatever you got, really. Well, maybe it did leak. Water pump job is done, although I haven't filled it with coolant yet. Now I'm working on the fuel supply system. We have this goofy electric pump here, which was connected to the battery with this. And that's really super dumb. So I'm going to replace the mechanical pump just on principle, although the old one may have worked. I suspect that this was being used to band-aid a starting issue, which is actually either a horrible vacuum leak or a horrible, horrible carburetor problem, which I will get to in a bit. But I will tell you, today, this truck actually just started. Cold. With no fuel dumped down the carburetor, and that has not happened ever since Tom bought the truck. It was an ongoing problem. Now, to get it to do that, I did have to crank those idle screws like all the way out to the point that it'll actually pull fuel through those circuits, because it didn't do that. Hey, I found the vacuum leak. I'm gonna cap that and then retune it. Anyway, I'm replacing the fuel pump. I've got the old one off. I've got this electric dealy bob out of the system, and I pulled these wires away because we will not be using those. Now I'm getting these lines down here situated, and I'm installing a new pump. The new one is configured slightly differently. I think this is actually the right pump, and the one that was on it was not. So the metal line going up to the carburetor was cut. The pump I took out had a nipple here, which pointed off in a random direction. I found this chunk of metal line in an old pump in my collection, and I've installed it here. I'm going to reconfigure the line to go over here, and that'll work just fine. I've also got the pre-filter that was on it previously attached to the new pump. That filter actually looks to be in pretty good shape, so I'm just going to leave it alone. There is a post-pump filter up here on top of the engine, and when the line is connected, it actually won't be directly over the exhaust. It'll be over here somewhere. Don't mind the gas going everywhere, and don't mind the gas leaking from here. Anyway, here is that pump I took off. Note, it's covered in oil. It's covered in oil because the bolts were loose. Quick note, on the big block Chrysler engine, the mechanical fuel pump is driven by a fuel pump push rod, which is run off of a lobe on the camshaft. What can happen is the end of that rod can start to wear away, and when it does that, you don't get a full stroke on the mechanical pump, or in extreme cases, it may not work at all. Now, clearly, in a truck like this where there were fuel system problems, which I think I've sorted out now, it's worth taking a look at that push rod. Now, I'm not going to take it all the way out, but I did notice it's able to fall all the way down against the threaded plug that holds it in the block, and that tells me the end can't be mushroomed that badly. If yours is jammed in the block, that's something to consider. I only just noticed a minute ago, this engine has manifolds, but it has Remflex gaskets. So apparently there was an exhaust leak at some point. Pump is in, which due to that push rod I mentioned is a little easier said than done. You have to slide the rod in and then get the little tongue of the pump under it and then push it all into place. And you'd better hope when you're installing it that the lobe is off lift, otherwise it'll be holding the pump out and you'll have to tighten the bolts against that. Anyway, it's in there, lines are connected. The line going up top is connected. I shortened up that section of line, so now if this leaks, hopefully it'll go more toward the hot intake instead of toward the hot exhaust. I should probably replace every section of hose. I mean, a couple of these aren't the worst. They're not like cracked, they're just a little squishy. They're only 8 years old. You saw me notice that vacuum line earlier that should not have been there. This is like a breather inlet for a vapor canister, which this truck does not have, and this is a vacuum connection. By routing a hose between those two, someone created an open vacuum leak. Not ideal. So I've capped both of those. I've also capped the bowl breather. This also would be used for a vapor canister, and if they're not covered or connected to something, fuel vapor can come out of this, and in some cases, that vapor can be ignited, like on a hot day, and then you have an engine fire. I've seen that happen, and it was because of this. So I corked that too. This is a noise isolator for the ignition. It's connected to the coil and grounded right there on one of the coil mounting bolts. I removed it because sometimes you'll end up with weird shorting problems through these and it can wipe out your ignition. This wire obviously looks terrible, so that's not great. Totally unnecessary with today's radios. Also, I tightened the bolts on the coil because, well, they weren't. I actually bought all of the tune-up parts for this truck. Plugs, wires, cap, rotor. Turns out they've all already been done. So I guess I'll be returning that stuff. I'm sure I mentioned that I was planning to replace the entire engine harness on this truck. It turns out it doesn't need that. In fact, the only things that look messed up on here, added wires. This one's for the electric choke, this one is for the tachometer, and the connector for coil positive has been changed. I'm not sure that's the right color wire either, so it may be patched in there somewhere, but it doesn't look like it's been messed with. I don't know why we thought it needed a whole harness. It's fine, and I'm leaving it alone. I keep finding these old school trailer brake resistors in trucks really nifty. Also really archaic garbage. I'll be removing that. The other part of the trailer brake triggering system is this hydraulic line. This would have teed in off the master cylinder and it goes to the brake controller under the dash. The neat part of this old school system is that you could have had some kind of pressure modulation, which of course we don't get with the cheapo time-based modules most trucks have these days. And by these days, I mean in the 90s and 2000s, because modern trucks have this functionality built in and it works really, really well. Anywho, I'm going to be removing this and installing the brand new brake controller from Mitch's other truck. Bye-bye. While removing the crappy old brake controller, I remembered that the parking brake didn't work when I was loading this on the trailer, and the reason was the release handle was stuck out. It wouldn't go back in at all. It was just like rusted solid. I fixed that with some PB Blaster and some light massaging with a screwdriver handle, and it actually works now, which is good. Looks like the pedal does stuff, so should have a parking brake. Now I'm turning my attention to that oil pump issue. I'm going to pull that thing out of there and take a look at it at least. See if it's damaged in any way. See if I can see an issue with the pressure relief valve. So I've got the oil filter off. I've drained most of that mess out. And now I'm going to remove the 4 bolts that hold it onto the block. It's so nice on the big block Mopar that you can do this on the outside. If this was a small block, we'd be dropping the oil pan right now, which is not fun. Of course, it's only just now occurred to me that I could have just pulled out the bypass valve and looked at it and found a little line where a piece of gunk got caught in it and lightly sanded it to smooth all that out, pretty it up, and then maybe reach in here and clean this up, then reinstall the bypass valve and skip several steps. Also, I wouldn't need a gasket now. I need a gasket now. The good news is it looks pretty nice inside this pump, except for that one little piece of grit right there. This is not an original either. You can tell that because it says USA on it. Also, the original style pumps, at least in the late 60s and early 70s, have cast-in lines here, which this one obviously does not. The casting on the new pump I got is slightly different. It does say USA on it, which actually surprises me. Looks nice, but I don't think we actually need that. I'm just gonna clean up this bypass valve, reassemble this pump, and put it back on the engine, allegedly with the gasket out of this box. Don't tell O'Reilly. This brings up an interesting point though. That oil pump is not original, but it is painted blue, which would seem to indicate originality. Now that I know that, I'm looking at this engine through a fresh lens, and I noticed right away, this is a 60s valve cover from a car, probably a 66 or 7 BC body. It's got the heater hose holder, which of course wouldn't be used on one of these trucks. The hoses just kind of always hang out here in the middle of nowhere. And that appears to be a C-body style driver's side cover. You could tell that because it has the wire holders that route the number 7 wire over to the back there. Also, this style breather mounting, they stopped using that in 1970. Moisture. When these things sit around for ages and ages, it's not at all uncommon to see condensation up in here. You'll see it in the valve cover as well. Notice the creamy oil there? That does not mean there's like a head gasket issue or anything like that. It just means this truck spent a lot of time sitting. With any luck, once we actually get it on the road, that stuff will start evaporating with a few heat cycles. Now that I know so many of these details are wrong, in addition to the intake and carburetor, of course, and that's not surprising at all, I'm going to go to this number pad here that should give us an ID on this engine. Now, if this is a correct truck engine, what we should see is 7T440. But we don't see that. We see J440. Moparts.org has an excellent Mopar engine identification page. I've been referring to that for like decades now, almost. On that page, J is listed as being the letter for 1973. So this is a 73 440, not a 77 440. So the bad news is it's not original. The good news is this engine has a forged crank. You can tell that right away by looking at the harmonic balancer and noticing it does not have that funky weight attached to the front. That's a neutral balance balancer. 73 was just about the end of the line for that. So that's pretty cool. This is actually an upgrade. I'm not entirely sure if it's the same low compression ratio as the later engine or not. It's certainly not like a high performance unit by any means. So now we're here. I've got the pump cleaned up outside and in as best I can. And I've cleaned up the bypass valve with some fine sandpaper. You can see some scratches in it right here. So I am going to try to make absolutely certain there's nothing in that bore that could foul this up in the future. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a hone that fits down in there, but I got some sandpaper in on my finger, smoothed that thing out, then cleaned it with a wire brush and a drill, and then sprayed it all out like 3 more times. You can see the faintest of traces where those scrapes happen, but there's nothing there to catch a fingernail now, so I'm confident this will do just fine. I could actually feel the grit in this thing when I started, and now it's nice and smooth. Very good. Took it out one more time to hit it with some lubrication. Of course, it'll be covered in oil soon enough, but we might as well get it started on the right foot. Then the spring goes in, sinks into the top of the valve, and finally the cap, wherever I put that. As you spin the cap down, you can feel the spring in there compressing. Now that spring is essentially fighting against oil pressure. Oil pressure will go into that front open area of the valve, and it'll try to push the valve this way against the spring. When it reaches a certain pressure, the valve opens and allows the pressure to bypass, and in that way, it manages the amount of pressure coming out of the pump. If that valve is able to stick in the open or bypass position, then the pressure built in this pump just goes right out, the oil pressure in your engine drops, and you no longer have sufficient lubrication, which is bad. It can ruin things. This one, as mentioned, was suspect, but I'm confident now, judging by the way it feels, it'll work just fine. Time to replace the O-ring, double check the flat gasket to make sure the holes line up, and then I'll reinstall this thing. Pump is back in, and I have reinstalled the filter I took off. It's been on there for a while, but there are very few miles on this oil, so I'm going to let it ride for a little bit. We'll get some miles on this thing, and then we'll give it a good oil change. Apparently the oil is also slightly over full, so I guess I don't need to worry about topping it up for the moment. Now I'm going to get some antifreeze back in this thing. As I'm filling it, I will have that heater hose, which leaks anyway, loose and pulled up off the nipple. I'll fill it up until coolant comes out of there, pop the hose back on, and then I'll tighten it with a fresh clamp. I think that was actually the problem. I did reset the idle mixture screws to 2 turns out each since I capped that vacuum port over there. Hopefully that just magically works. Remind me to fix the dome light. Oh, and remind me to rip those off. It's just terrible. The dash lights even work. Why do I hit the pedal when I know the pump doesn't work? No idea. Oh. Yeah. Accelerator pump. What a good idea. Don't see any fuel leaks, so that's good. There's some antifreeze over here, but only because I overflowed that heater fitting a lot faster than I expected. It took me a minute to realize what was happening because it still wasn't idling right. It was like idling super low, and it wanted less idle screw. Because I eliminated a big vacuum leak, I actually had to raise the idle speed to get it back where it was. So that's a good sign. These are currently at 1 turn each. Okay. Okay. So it'll run with the idle screws all the way in. That's interesting. Certainly wouldn't do that before. Maybe we were pulling main fuel. Let's see. Huh. Okay, well, things are still weird. If you've watched a bunch of my videos doing this sort of thing, you know those distributor vacuum modules are often bad. So I tested this one. It doesn't leak, but it also doesn't really seem to do much. That time you could hear the engine drop down a little bit, but I don't know, it's just kind of strange. Broke out my faithful Innova dial-back timing light. Set this thing at 10 degrees base, which got it to 35 degrees total when the engine is revved up. It's definitely got stock springs in there. It took quite a while for that advance to come in, but it sounded smooth going up. This is a very stock engine, so it doesn't need anything radical. It did idle a little higher, pull a little bit more vacuum, and sound a bit smoother with more base timing, but I think for this particular setup, being in a truck, this thing's going to be hauling weight around. I'm going to leave it just like this, and we'll see what we get. It's plenty responsive. There's a slight delay there at the bottom, but again, truck. So stock. I'm gonna try and fix this real fast with like a pry bar. Now taking bets on whether this will work as well as I think. Well, kinda. I want to bend the opening of the pipe. Okay. That one bent a whole lot easier. Now that's interesting. Why don't they match? I set the floor jack under that rearward one. Found out it's routed very carefully over, around, and then under the trailer hitch. So bend it up all the way to that. Put a pry bar in it again, kind of bend it this way. That's what we get. It's not going to get much closer. Apparently this rear right tire slowly goes flat, so I'm going to fix that. Well, not fix it. I'm just going to put air in it and hope it fixes itself. So it turns out these are actually Ford wheels, which is, unfortunate, but the hubcaps actually fit. I just don't know if I put them on there or if we keep the tough steely look. Well, how do you start now? Not bad. I'll take it. It's been a bit. The fuel gauge actually does something. I am shocked to learn that. So the factory oil and temp gauges work, and then these aftermarket oil and temp gauges also work. Working reverse lights? Now that I don't believe. Oh, that crew cab long bed lifestyle. It's kind of hard to maneuver. Okay, the horribly bright LEDs on the dash are almost kind of sort of dimmable. I used to have lights like this on the dash of some Dart. 73 Swinger? I don't know. Anyway, it's the absolute worst for night vision. You know I was going to do a lamp check, but I forgot. Also, I'm going to need to raise that idle speed. You can see all the lights dimming. I've got it set dirt nasty low, as the kids are saying. Yeah, this thing doesn't corner great, but it runs nice. It's not a powerhouse, but it's nice and smooth. High beams work. Headlights are not great. If you don't know, my camera does this magical thing where it makes the headlights look super bright and everything. I promise you they are not like that in real life. It drives pretty well. It's smooth. It reminds me of the 74 W100, the club cab long bed. That was a nice driving truck. This is about the same. You'd think it would just be terrifying and horrible, but actually it handles all right. I'm blind though, you know. Hopefully Bambi's not out tonight. Not bad at all. Again, for a crew cab long bed from the 70s. It does smell like burning oil, which is to be expected because big block. I've never had a tin Grille D200. I had a W200 Power Wagon one winter. That was a great truck, but it sure didn't ride nicely like this one does. All that wheelbase really helps to smooth out the heavy springs. Yeah, I'm impressed. This isn't bad at all. You could totally live with this day to day. I hate to say this, but I think I'm hearing some rear end noise on deceleration. You don't really hear it going down the road, but you sure hear it when you slow down. As a mechanic, I really wish I didn't notice these things sometimes. Oh, the lawn mowing robot! See if you can hear this noise when I let off. That's a pretty distinct howling. I've overhauled a couple Danas before. I actually own the case spreader tool and everything. I'm not looking forward to it. That was not on the docket for this truck. I kind of like this goofy tack holder thing. You know, it's here, so it might as well just stay. Unlimited power? Not really, but the smooth application of torque. Dude, I went to carefully adjust the rear view mirror so I could actually see, and it just fell right off. That is not my fault. I put 20 bucks in it, and the gas gauge actually went up. Miracle of miracles, but yeah, 20 bucks is only like a quarter tank. I'll have you know I tighten these belts pretty hard trying to avoid squealing. Just another part of the 440 lifestyle. Not bad. Not bad at all. So yeah, it's one of those good news, bad news type deals. The good news, that is a nice driving truck. Really, it is. The bad news, of course, the horrible whirring noises. Cannot wait to figure that out. Right now, it's time to go make some cheeseburgers, so we'll get back to all that sometime. Beep, beep. Well, it's a week later, it's dark again, and the truck is right where and how I left it. So that's the good news. Tell you what, it'll be actual good news if this truck just fires up and runs. So let's test that theory. Did I mention that the accelerator pump doesn't work very well? Oh, come on. Haha! Too many pumps? Not enough pumps? Don't know. Yeah, still a little stubborn. But it does start, so that's something. LEDs, still horrible. The license plate light fixed itself. Very nice. Oh, I need to top up the headlight fluid in that one. All right, add it to the list. So here's the deal. We still need to do a bunch of stuff with this truck. Dana 60 rebuild, that'll be fun. Carburetor overhaul, the aforementioned brake controller thingy. A dome light might be nice, and I'm sure I can come up with a lot more. Oh, did I mention it's cold? Well, it is. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this video right here, and we'll get back to this truck sometime in the very near future. I know Mitch is looking forward to driving it, so I'm gonna make that happen. But not today. Hopefully you enjoyed that. In any case, as ever, thank you very much for watching. And remember, crew cab long bed is long.